Right, let's talk about the stomach in this video. So we're continuing on with the alimentary canal. We started in the oral cavity, and we had the pharynxes, the oral, naso, and laryngopharynxes, and then we traveled down in light purple here. I'd like to keep my color the same. We have the esophagus. And we said in the first video that substances travel down the esophagus via the process called peristalsis. And then they enter the stomach through this red structure, which is a muscle. It's a sphincter. So anytime you see a round muscle like that, you know it's a sphincter, and this is the cardiac sphincter. It lies in the region of the body close to the heart, hence the term cardiac. Now we're going to come back to this a little bit later and talk about why when you have issues here, it's called heartburn, but let's get some of these general details out of the way first. The regions, the stomach's broken down into regions. So you have light green, yellow, light blue, and this is like a dark tan. It looks almost this one and this one look the same, but that's a tan. This upper part of the stomach, and since I can't really write in yellow, I'll write in black, is called the fundus region. This is a region. In light green, this area is called the cardia. See, everything in that region has that name. Just like on the mandible and on the vertebra, the largest portion is called the body. So in light blue here, I have the body of the stomach. And then down here, I have another sphincter. This goes out into the small intestine. So this is called the pyloric sphincter. And this region that's in kind of a tan color is called the pyloria or the pyloric region. And again, those just kind of correlate to the regions or areas. It's not necessarily a structure. So in terms of structures, we have two major structures. We have three different muscle layers, and look at the directions here. So you can see that the muscle directions go this way, they go across, and then they come down at an angle. And then that ties into their names. So, and I try to do different shades of pink. So I have pink, red, and then a darker pink so that we can kind of see they're related, but these are all muscles. The one that runs this way is like if you think about latitude goes this way, longitude goes this way. These are the longitudinal muscles. Longitudinal muscle layer. Let me stay with the color coding here. Let me go to red. Coming around this way is the circular. And just like we did with muscles, our outside abdominal muscles, these are oblique. The oblique muscle layer. The stomach has basically two functions. The main function is digestion, and we're going to talk about how these play a role in digestion. But let's finish up our structures first. In kind of my darker green, it's kind of an olive green here. These are folds in the stomach called rugae, R-U-G-A-E, and these allow the stomach to expand. So these allow expansion. It's a little bit like if you've ever seen an accordion, there's folds in an accordion, and when they play the accordion, they open it, and those folds can expand. And as they close the accordion, the folds reform. And that's what the rugae do. You've got two curves here. This is called the lesser curvature, and this is called the greater curvature. I'm not going to put that on the test, but I want to talk about the fact that there's something that attaches here. Greater curvature. In our cats, we saw that there was this kind of an apron of a membrane that is laden with fat that lays over top of the abdominal organs. And that membrane was called the greater omentum. This is where the greater omentum attaches. So this is the attachment point for the greater omentum. On this greater curvature. All right, finally, and this isn't part of the stomach, but it's kind of good to note, and I'm in orange over here. This is the small intestine. And we're going to see that this first section of the small intestine is called the duodenum. So to be more specific, it's the first section. There's 3 sections to the small intestine. All right, let's get into now the functions. So the stomach has 2 main functions. Let's see, what color haven't I used? Go to, yeah, I'm just gonna go with black. The first and most important function is digestion. We're going to see that the alimentary canal, the esophagus is mostly, we're just passing it. So it's a passageway, but everything else in the alimentary canal is either helping us digest, absorb, or eliminate. And the stomach is all about digestion. So there's 2 kinds of digestion. There's physical, which would be churning. And that's going to be accomplished by these muscles over here. So what reason we've got directionality here is if we only had the longitudinal, when those contracted, the stomach would move this way. If we only had circular, the stomach would move this way. If we only had oblique, but because we have 3 different directions, the stomach can go this way, this way, this way. Think about it. If you're churning ice cream in a bag or something in a bag, you make the direction, you make it go in all different directions. And so that's what these muscle layers allow us. So it's the muscles that allow us to do that churning. The other one is chemical. And we have 2 different kinds of chemical digestion. The first one is through hydrochloric acid. Or HCl. And this is produced, the hydrochloric acid, I'm running out of space, so I'm gonna kind of bring it over here. It's produced by cells, P-R-O-D-U-C-E-D, cells that are found in pits. There's like these little pits in these rugae. And inside of these pits, you have 2 kinds of cells. You have chief cells and parietal cells. Parietal cells produce this hydrochloric acid. And we should note that this hydrochloric acid does break down the food, but there's actually, I guess, 3 functions. Let's go with function number 1. Function number 2 is an immune function. We want to kill invaders. And so if you have some bacteria that made it into your stomach, that made it through intact, you really don't want them to get into your digestive tract. So this hydrochloric acid does a great job of killing any bacteria that made it down, or intact viruses. So digestion, but also this. And here we're also breaking down, so. Kind of just in general. The second type of chemical digestion we have is an enzyme called pepsin. It's an enzyme. There are 2 terms for stomach. We have pepto. This means stomach. and gastro. Those both mean stomach. So we'll see Pepto-Bismol, Pepto for stomach, the Bismo, it used to have bismuth in it, which really isn't good for you to take as a medicine, but back when they made Pepto-Bismol, they didn't know that. Pepsin is produced by a different kind of cell called chief cells. And it breaks down proteins. So up until this point, we've been digesting, we've done carbs in the oral cavity. Now in the stomach, the carb digestion, there's other enzymes, and so carb digestion is going to continue. But now in the stomach, we start to break down our proteins with pepsin. All of this might have triggered, oops, I forgot our second function or third function. Function number 3 is we have some minor drug absorption. Some absorption. So we can absorb water, alcohol, some certain types of drugs, H2O, alcohol, simple drugs like aspirin. Not all drugs, but some. Most of our absorption, though, is going to take place in the small intestine. There's one disorder I'd like to talk about, and those are ulcers. So let's do that in, let's switch colors. Have we done blue? Not much. I'm going to switch to blue. All right, so our disorder. Are ulcers. The rugae, in addition to chief cells and parietal cells, we have got a thick mucus lining. So there's a thick mucus lining. In the stomach. So obviously we have goblet cells. You should know that goblet cells produce mucus. That's how, how do you keep from the hydrochloric acid and the pepsin? How do you keep that from digesting your own organ? Well, there has to be something to protect all of this. And it's this thick mucus lining. And in fact, with that mucus lining, that still gets broken down. You digest the mucus lining every couple of days and you excrete it and you have to create a new one. So those goblet cells are constantly working. But sometimes you break it down faster than you form it. And we call that an ulcer. So an ulcer is basically a hole in this mucus. And this allows areas of the stomach to become sores because these hydrochloric acid and the pepsin are digesting on these areas. If you get an ulcer in this region, you call it a gastric ulcer. If you get an ulcer here, you call it an esophageal ulcer. Now, esophageal ulcers can form not just, so your juices kind of sit down here in the bottom part of your stomach. So how do you form, it's easy to see how you could get an ulcer here, but how do you get an ulcer way up there? Sometimes you have a condition where your stomach acids get up into the esophagus because the cardiac sphincter has weakened. So so this is disorder number 1. Disorder number 2, I'll just switch back to, let's do white purple. Disorder number 2. Is esophageal gastric reflux. So what happens is you have a weakened this happens if your cardiac sphincter is weakened. And your gastric juice can get back up into your esophagus, which doesn't have this thick lining. And it can over time cause these esophageal ulcers. If ulcers go untreated for too long, especially in the esophagus, can lead to cancer in your esophagus. So esophageal cancer, and it can lead to damage, and you actually have to have your esophagus cut away and reattached. But again, an ulcer is just an area where there's a hole in that mucus, and you get sores. So this results in sores. Another thing that can cause this to happen are bacteria. So you can get a bacteria in your stomach called Heliobacter. Just abbreviate. Heliobacter. And they're a bacteria that can cause, they can actually attack the mucus lining and make the areas where the acid can attack the lining. All right, so what are our takeaways? We went over the anatomy first. We have regions, we've got sphincters, we've got muscle layers. Then we talked about the function of the stomach. We have three functions: digestion, immune response, and drug absorption. Our digestion can be physical or chemical. Chemically, it could be hydrochloric acid or pepsin, and they each have their own particular source and their own particular job. And then in disorders, we talked about ulcers. You can have gastric ulcers or esophageal ulcers. Esophageal ulcers are often the result of the secondary disorder we talked about, which was gastric reflux or GERD, a gastroesophageal reflux disease is another way to call it. But yeah, either way, these holes, if they go untreated, can and they cause a lot of pain, can lead to cancer. All right, that's it for the stomach, and we'll go on to the small intestine.